All right, James, if you're ready, I'm ready.
I'm ready if you're ready.
Let's do this. Good evening, everybody. My name is Lori Fellens, and as WSMA Executive Director, I'd like to welcome you tonight to our WSMA member school educators that are here, our WMEA members, and any other music and arts educators or stakeholders. This is our fourth Wisconsin Education Forum since back in March when this whole pandemic started. And this forum is being recorded. We plan to make it available after tonight on our WSMA Communications YouTube page. So if you have friends who weren't able to join us, they can certainly find a recording of this there. During this 90-minute event, you'll hear from our very esteemed guest, Dr. James Weaver, who is about to talk to you tonight about the third release of information connected to the International Performing Arts AEROSOL study. And there'll also be plenty of time tonight for webinar participants to ask questions about how this research can support us here in Wisconsin with making music indoors during this most complex 2021 school year. It is my honor to introduce to you Dr. James Weaver. He is the Director of Performing Arts and Sports for the National Federation of State High School Associations. He's been a teacher and administrator at the district, state, and national level. And as the Director of Performing Arts and Sports, he oversees student participation, professional development, and awareness of performing arts activities throughout the nation's 19,500 plus high schools. He earned a bachelor's degree from Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, a master's in educational administration and leadership from Northern State University in Aberdeen, South Dakota, and his doctorate in school district administration and educational leadership from the University of South Dakota in Vermillion, South Dakota. So he is a Midwesterner at heart with all of us. And just as a warm up before we kick this off, Dr. Weaver, as this has been my warm up question this year in a few meetings, if there were a top 40 hit song written about the year 2020, what do you think the title of that song would be?
You know, I even knew this was coming and I forgot to look it up. Just for funsies, let's select Blue from the 1999 hit, the Blue Alba Diva song or whatever.
Awesome. All right. Perfect. Before Dr. Weaver shares the study of aerosol and performing arts information, I want to clarify a few items for our attendees related to why we're here tonight. So last week, we learned about the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction document that was released on November 6th. And in this document, there are statements about playing wind instruments indoors not being supported by published research, and issues with masks with slits not potentially being covered by the governor's mask mandate. And so one of the things we want to remind you about tonight, and it's the reason we're here, is WSMA wants to make sure we put out really solid information for everyone to be making the decisions in their school districts that they need to make. DPI documents are guidance and not mandates. That's how we operate in Wisconsin. And so we're offering this opportunity to hear Dr. Weaver so he can share the research that's been conducted at University of Colorado Boulder and University of Maryland, and the information that that research team has about the implementation of the mitigation strategies nationwide since the release of the round one findings. So during his talk, please use the Q&A feature, and we will monitor all questions for answering both during and following the formal part of the discussion. So we'd encourage you to not wait till he's finished to start asking your questions, because he may be able to integrate some of the answers anyway into his presentation. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you, Dr. Weaver, and thank you again for being here tonight.
Absolutely, thank you. All right, well, good evening, everybody. I'm very glad to see such a strong turnout from the state of Wisconsin. Like Lori had mentioned, I'm a upper Midwesterner through and through, so we should have a good time tonight talking about respiratory aerosol transmission and how it affects what we do in the music classroom. A couple things here. I just wanted to start out by introducing our two lead researchers. The reason I want to do this, I want to stress the importance of how impressive these two individuals are. They do a great job for us in what they do in the research labs. Um, what I want to be able to say here, so Dr. Shelley Miller is our lead researcher. She is a professor of mechanical engineering and faculty in the environmental engineering program at the University of Colorado Boulder. She holds her master's and PhD in civil and environmental engineering from the University of California, Berkeley, and her bachelor's degree is in applied mathematics from Harvey Mudd College. Dr. Miller teaches about and investigates urban air quality and works diligently to understand the impact of air pollution on public health and the environment. She is also an expert in indoor environmental quality, including airborne infectious disease transmission and control and air cleaning technologies. Dr. Miller is a member of the Academy of Fellows of the International Society for Indoor Air and Climate. She has also published over 70 peer-reviewed articles on air quality, authored a chapter in Indoor Air Quality and the Environment Engineering Handbook, and is an active scientist on Twitter and publishes a lot of open access documents as much as she can. Dr. Schrebrink is a professor of mechanical engineering and founding director of the Center for Sustainability in the Built Environment at the University of Maryland. The focus of Schrebrink's research is on measurements and multi-scale modeling of built infrastructure to provide reliable assessments of how these systems affect occupant respiratory health, building energy consumption, and associated CO2 emissions. She taught and developed new courses at University of Maryland, Penn State, and Harvard. She also presented more than 30 guest lectures at different universities, including Stanford, Princeton, MIT, Columbia. She was elected an international member of the Serbian National Academy of Engineering in 2013. She became an elected fellow of the International Society of Indoor Air Quality and Climate in 2018, and an elected fellow of the International Building Performance and Simulation Association in 2019. Most recently, her research work has been recognized with 2019-20 University of Maryland Board of Regents Faculty Award for Excellence in Innovation. I go through their bios because I think it's really important to see who's leading this research. And as you can tell, these two are not only nationally recognized, but internationally recognized. The rest of our team we have here, you'll see rounds out our 14-member team. We have Professor Jean Hertzberg, Abhishek Kumar, Dr. Samir Patel, Taya Stockman, Professor Darren Toohey, and Professor Marina Vance on the University of Boulder side. On the University of Maryland side, we have also Nicholas Matisse, Sebastian Romo, Lingzi Wang, and Shengwei Zhu. These are great researchers that have a lot of expertise that go along with Yelena and Shelley's expertise. So let's dive into some results here. So let me back up a second and then we'll dive into some results. How this all came about is we had an idea back in April about how this was being transmitted. And the Skagit Valley Choir incident out in Washington really became the fundamental issue that we had to deal with as far as what we needed to make sure we could trace and track and mitigate in performing arts classrooms, whether that be music, theater, speech, debate, dance, anything like that. And when we started doing a lot of the background research, we're realizing that aerosol transmission really is one of the forefront things. And today we know that the aerosol transmission is far more common than the fomite transmission. And fomite transmissions is the touch contact transmission. So what we started doing is saying, well, let's check this out, see what happens. And then serendipitously, the same week that my co-chair and I decided, I think we can take this on, was the now famous NATS ACDA webinar that started talking about how crazy singing could be in the environment. We're like, okay, now we know what we need to do. So through that incident, we were able to run into Shelley Miller and Yelena Schrebrink and said, hey, what do we do with this? And they're like, well, this has never been studied before. We have no idea how instrument aerosols are done. We have no idea how aerosol transmission in singing occurs on a regular basis. So we should try to figure this out. And we said, great, how do we do that? And they had no idea because it's never been done before. So what started out as a small project, and I'm going to throw some dollar figures out here so people understand kind of the size of scope this is. At first, it was about this $37,000 project. And we're like, great, we can raise that and then we can get moving and be done a month or two, right? And then as we started diving deeper and deeper into how this is going to work, we're like, well, now it's going to be like $320,000 and it's going to be an 18-month-long project. And we're like, great, we think we can do the money, but we need to get the timing down to like 6 months. And then after they stopped having a coronary and they're getting back to reality, like, yeah, I think we can do this, but it's going to be a lot of work. So my co-chair and I, Mark Speed, put a lot of effort into, assisting as much as we can as far as providing, good playing conditions, making sure we have the players available, making sure that the exercises that are being performed are real world exercises. And we wanted those things to be as real world as possible. So they had all the science expertise and we had the musical expertise in order to get all the pieces moving, flowing together. So if we fast forward today, we're now in month 5 of 6 of this study. And we've been fortunate that our scientists have allowed us to send out the preliminary results because otherwise we'd be flying blind for this whole fall semester. So it's kind of a little bit of background. And I go through that background because I think it's important to put it into context how we start looking at these charts. So for example, this is our aerosol concentrations over time, normalized with standard deviations. And so what you'll see here is up here on the y-axis, that one that goes up and down, is the average concentrations of particles per cubic centimeter. Remember, a cubic centimeter is very, very small. So this is where we're at for what we're able to do in the gray, and these little bars here are the maximums. But the gray bars are 5 separate experiments. Each experiment is 5 minutes in length, and each 5-minute length is one individual 1-minute experiment. So think of each bar as like basically 25 different experiments put into one bar. And then the yellow is the same experiments, but with the bell cover mitigations that we've been recommending. So as you can see here, we know that instruments produce aerosol. That is something we've known. We figured out how it does it. We have a hypothesis on why they do is because of a wet vibrating surface. And that'll be important here in just a moment. And then what we wanted to find out after that is, well, if we know we can produce aerosols that are big enough droplets in order to carry the virus of COVID-19, can we then mitigate that? And that has been the big trick that we've been trying to figure out for the last several months. So all the APS data that we're going to go through here today is particle sizes that are big enough to carry the COVID virus, but not so big that they would fall to the ground right away. So it's kind of that sweet spot of that short range to medium range transmission area. The bell covers we're using in this chart would be your dual layer or your multi-layer bell cover with the MERV 13 material between the 2 exterior layers. Here we have some woodwind examples here. So we have clarinet, bassoon, saxophone, oboe is our big offender. Notice that this scale is bigger than the scale that was on brass. And then flute, which is the one that everyone thought was going to be the instrument excluded from band from here going forward. Turns out it doesn't really produce a lot of aerosol. And this is important to know. And this is the same as the recorder. For any of you general music teachers out there, recorder and flute have the same issue. Remember how to create an aerosol on an instrument is to have a wet vibrating surface. The oboe creates a lot of aerosol because it has multiple wet vibrating surfaces that slap together. And then the large particles that you produce in your body are then chopped up and aerosolized and then blown out the instrument. With the flute and the recorder, there is no wet vibrating surface. So that's what we have on there. And I'll answer that question, Brian, here in just a moment. So that's why we have that issue. And that's why the flute is not a big issue. So we recommend putting the flute underneath a mask. You slide the head joint in, and that'll stop your normal large particles that you'd be breathing out when you speak and blow from going out in the environment. So Brian asked a question about what makes the soprano singer so dramatic. Let's look at it here. This is examples of theater, monologue speaking, musical theater singing, baritone singing. What makes this a big difference here is that, as we know, the higher the pitch you get, the more vibration your vocal cords produce, which makes more of the large particles, more large droplets, break apart. And so that's how that works on there. So that's why we're watching all of our higher pitch singers producing more aerosols and our lower pitch singers produce less aerosols. However, as we look at this, this is a surgical mask that they're wearing, and it has the surgical mask standard of GB T32610 is the standard we have on here. And so with that standard, you can see that we are able to take a lot of these aerosols and reduce them dramatically down, which is good. So a couple things we have here, and I'm going to kind of read the slide, and I promise I won't read slides very much. But we have here is a sampling performing at the bell, does not take into account what's expelled out of the keyholes. And I'll address the keyholes in woodwind instruments here in a moment. And then we also talked about some concentration issues that occur with this. And these appendix A and C relations, those are to the written report. So if you want to see the written report, I believe Lori has a link to that on the website. So example A, for example, we have saxophone as an overall aerosol release of 0.7 parts per cubic centimeter in unmitigated play, and an aerosol release of 0.32 particles per cubic centimeter, which is a reduction of 64% with the bell cover. And this is important when I show you the next slide. And then here's the oboe one, too. Has 4 parts per cubic centimeter unmitigated, and then goes down to a half a part per cubic centimeter mitigated. So what that means is if you look at these charts here, you see here's the saxophone, here's the oboe. There's a big difference between just the starting points. So then we go into what do these masks mean? So these masks here, or these bell covers / masks, are either the surgical masks, which is you'll see with the asterisk, or the bell cover, and you'll see what their rates of effectiveness is. What's interesting about this here is that we have, like on the saxophone, for example, it looks like it's not as effective, but it's starting from a much lower point than some of the other ones that we're coming up with. So what we want to do is have the have that kind of in our perception of what we're going to be doing. So how critical is the specific type of bell covers? There are lots of folks using things like pantyhose. Yeah, and I'm going to get into pantyhose in a second, because this is one of the things where as the science has evolved, our recommendations have evolved. So pantyhose is a no-go. We want what we saw in the flow visualization long ago on the pantyhose thing is that it stopped the flow visualization. However, when we put it through the APS test, it wasn't really doing much. So that's when we came out with the second round of results. We were like, well, have a dual layer of something that's thick. So for example, if you had a thick pantyhose that was 80 denier thickness or greater on both sides, and you put a MERV 13 filter in the middle, then you're pretty much good to go, right? That's really what we want to see, is some sort of a thick material with a MERV 13 filter material between the two. Let's see here. Yeah, so we'll be looking into children's voices and humming. We're having some issues getting children into the lab due to minors in experimental testing. So we're working on that one as well. But what I want to get into now is here's the example that our anonymous attendee had mentioned about the pantyhose. So when we play, this is APS data for the trumpet. When we play with no bell cover, here's our concentrations. This is one exercise. So here are our concentrations per cubic centimeter. When we played the pantyhose, that actually went up. And it's the same thing that Duke University found with those neck gaiter masks. The type of material actually will take those particles that are already coming out as an aerosol and chop them up more and then produce more aerosols that hang out in the air longer. Now, if it's really thick, it changes the spectrum for that, right? So this is just if you take that pantyhose and stretch it over and put it on. If you have like a couple layers of 80 denier thickness, it's not going to do that as much. But if you put the MERV 13 material in there, that really does solve a big issue there. So this is our 2-layer MERV 13 material in the middle, bell cover. You'll see from no bell cover to bell cover, it's quite a bit of a difference. And then this is them reading a book. We have the reading in here. It's a phonics book that has a mixture of consonants and vowels that go through to make sure that we're really getting a good spread of what's produced when reading. And then you'll see we played with a no bell cover again. This is the instrument cold, and then a bell cover, and then a background. And then we've decided to, because the trumpet is small, to slap a surgical mask on there. So it'd be one of those blue surgical masks that met the standard that you can read in the written report. And as you see, when we rubber band a surgical mask on the bell of a trumpet, it brings it down to the background level of aerosol generation. And then we're going back to our multi-layer with the MERV material, and you see we're just a little bit higher, but we're still pretty low. Then we bounce back up to no bell cover, and then we tried spandex just to see what happens, and it kind of does the same thing as the pantyhose there. Not saying you can't use the thickness of the material, but make sure there's a MERV 13 material in it. That's really important. When we look at the flute, I want to show you the spectrum of the flute here. This is why we have not really had a concern of the flute, and the recorder APS data is very similar to this. You'll see on this axis here, the total concentrations of particles per cubic centimeter. We're almost down to 0 with no bell covers. We do get a reduction with the bell cover, but you see here, like our background levels of aerosol are already a little bit higher than what we have for the rest of the flute performance. And then when we read, we're actually getting a lot more than what we have with the unmitigated play for the flute. So what we really want to do here is stop the larger droplets, which is the stuff that would normally come out when you're speaking. So that's why we were looking at that mask with the head joint. Here's our soprano singer, same thing, no mask. This is during the warm-ups. Then all of a sudden we masked, and then as we're singing in this 20-minute mark here, we're starting to see spikes of aerosols coming out as they're warming up. And then we look at masks, and if you sing with a mask, it's the same as if you read unmasked. So we're looking at near background levels with that multi-layer or that 3-layer surgical style mask that has that fancy standard of GBT32610. You don't have to remember that. That is in the written report, so you can grab that. But it is the one, if I cover up the brand name here, it is basically just that cheap, $3 box you can get at Walmart or Target or wherever you're buying these masks at for 25 of them. So we're not talking the hard ones to get. Here's clarinet. Again, clarinet, we have bell cover. Bell covers and reading are about the same thing. We get the same thing with the bell cover in the background. And then when we play fully warmed up, no bell cover, we're getting a whole bunch there. And then just to show, we've got that again. Yes. Yep, that is true. Sorry, in the chat. So singing with a mask is relative to reading without a mask. I should say reading without a mask at a typical conversational level. So think about reading out loud to your child at night, right? So we're not talking projecting and reading. We're talking basically reading out loud to yourself in the confined area. So that is a little bit different. Then in the theater area, same kind of trends here. So we don't need to go into some of that. So yeah, let me cover this thing with the clarinet real quick here. Actually, if I could have Lawrence just remember your question, because I'll answer that. I'll get the other report up and I'll answer that question about the keyholes. So we did some modeling here on what this looks like in a rehearsal hall. So this is a fairly large rehearsal hall. It's 12 meters or 12.5 meters wide by about 9 meters high and 9.5 meters wide. We're going to put in only this player 1 or person 1 is infected. This guy wants to be infected, but we didn't actually infect him in the model. So just pretend he's blue. So we have 7 performers and 1 conductor. Conductor is person number 8. What we have here is here's the airflow standards, which is actually the airflow of this real room at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Same thing with the outlet flow rate, and the outlet flow rate's at the bottom. So all your air is coming out of the top and going out of the bottom. Yep, Amanda will cover that as well. Then we have here with the human body surfaces, this is how much we have. This is the mouth of the infected singer. 48 quanta, that's how much virus is being shed per hour of the COVID-19 virus. And so you'll see here, this is kind of a real world scenario. What this looks like here when we have the spread of the viral aerosols from person 1 is anything that starts getting up into this light green teal area starts having an elevated risk. And the higher up this scale you go, the higher the risk you are of being infected, red being 100% chance of infection. So without a mask, you can see here, we have a lot of red and greens hitting this number 2 person that you can't see in this noodle cloud. In an isoconcentric surface, you'll see here that anyone who's built into this cloud has a 30 to 40% chance of infection in here. Then in here, what we're looking at is with a mask, you can see that the red, greens, and oranges have stayed pretty much in one area and is being taken care of by most of the ventilation in the room. When we look at the isoconcentration surface, the same thing appears, and this person down here is now out of that cloud. So if you look at over here with no mask, person number 11 has a risk of, or person number 2, excuse me, has a risk reduction of 85% if the infected person is wearing a surgical style mask. So, and then someone had asked if a surgical grade mask, what they do is the surgical mask we're talking about is this cheap mask right here, right? This, the one you can buy for $3 for a box of 25 of them at Walmart or Target or wherever you want to go buy stuff from. So this is not a N95 mask. This is the multi-layer disposable surgical style mask. So hopefully Jody answers that question. And that's the results that we get in this spread right here. And this is with singers. So you see here, person number 2 is an 85% reduction of being infected. Person number 3 is a 61% chance. And you can see here how that goes for all players, or all persons 2 through 8. Overall, we're looking at a reduction of risk of 82% of that spread happening in that room, which is really important to remember. Now, this is also an all of the above strategy, right? So this is not just the mask. The mask is the biggest mitigator that we can do easily, but this also has well-ventilated room. Also, this is after 60 minutes. This is why our recommendation of 30 minutes still remains, because at 30 minutes, this ISO concentration cloud is just down in this area here. So if we reduce the amount of time, increase the amount of airflow, we all wear masks and we're all spread out like there are in this room, we're going to do pretty well trying to avoid infection. Same kind of thing. This is with clarinet players now. So what you see here is the same kind of noodle clouds, and then when we wear a mask or a bell cover, you see most of this dark noodle cloud turn really dark blue, which is where we want it to be. That's the reduced amount of risk. Look at it in ISO concentration cloud. Without a bell cover, we're starting to see this cloud form in the room. With a bell cover, you see it stays right next to the person. One reason why these models are different is because when you're singing, your plume of aerosol goes straight out from the height of the person's mouth, where in the clarinet, it's pointing down to the floor. So there is a fluid dynamic difference between how that works. So our 5 principal recommendations we have, like I mentioned, masking, distance, time, airflow, and hygiene. On the time, we're 30 minutes rehearsals, leave the room and allow 1 air change rate to occur between that rehearsal and the next rehearsal. Your facilities management should be able to help you out with this one. And then also on airflow, outdoors is the best. However, HEPA filtration, allowing extra airflow to come in through your HVAC system from the outside, and increasing your ACH rates also help improve the air quality within your room to try to filter out some of the viral spread that could be occurring in there. So some other key takeaways, like I mentioned at the beginning, we are at a month 5 of a 6-month study, and we're utilizing 2 independent labs between those 2 universities. Wind instruments and singing produce aerosol, which we know is happening. They vary by instrument as well as intensity. The produced aerosol amount is on average about the same with the exception of the oboe. Most aerosol is being expelled from the bell of the instrument and from the mouth of the performers. At this time, it appears that players that wear a surgical style mask with a slit for a mouthpiece and bell covers, aerosol transmissions reduce between 60 and 90%. Now, when you wear the slitted mask, this has been something I get a lot of questions on. If we put a slit in the mask, doesn't that negate everything? Well, there's a couple things that we need to remember. A mask with a slit in it is designed for performance time only. So you put that mask on with a slit, you bring the clarinet up because in the embouchure is making the connection, and that is closing off part of the area there. And what you're preventing is any leakage that's occurring around the mouthpiece. Now, when you're not playing, they shouldn't just sit there with the slitted mask on. They should have a second mask that I recommend they dangle on their ear. So when they're done playing or they're in a rest period or something, they bring the other mask over and they hook it on. And then when they're ready to play again, they unhook, let the one dangle on the ear, they play, they hook on the other mask, right? The slitted mask should only be used while they're playing. Otherwise, they should be masked up with a standard mask that we would have on through the hallways or anywhere else. Flutes and recorders create a minimum amount of aerosol. It's recommended to play the flute with the head joint between the masks. So you put the mask on, slide the flute through the head joint and go. Is it inconvenient? Yes. However, my whole thing on is it inconvenient or we're not going to have it, I'd rather err on the inconvenient side. The recorder, though, should use a slitted mask, just like the wood ones do. And then just put something on the end of the barrel just to stop some of the large droplets. So bell covers for woodwinds and brass should be made of material with multi-layer covers, the center layer being made of MERV 13 material. So we have no recommendation for the outside layers. They should just be thick material. A 3-layer surgical style mask using a standard such as, this is your time to write down that standard, and you'll see this number on almost all of the surgical style masks you'll find in the store. Singers produce a similar rate of aerosol as woodwinds and brass. The amount of aerosols depends on the constants, vowels, intensities, and pitch. Singers that are wearing a well-fit 3-layer surgical style mask with this GB standard also have reduced amount of aerosols. The face shields, those clear plastic ones that you see, are only effective at close range to stop large droplets. This is why you see them at the grocery stores and whatnot, because where that checker person is and that's not a very big distance, and you could be Hamilton King George spraying large particles out. That's what those stop. They do not stop a aerosol cloud from going. If you think of aerosol like water, that you just can't see, that shield is the water is just gonna go around it. And that's what an aerosol cloud will do as well. And then the other thing too is the plexiglass partitions or barriers between musicians, also not recommended. Same issue as what we have with the face shields. They will only stop the large particles. But if you have these barriers that are big enough, they will actually create dead zones in your room because your HVAC system is not designed for a partitioned space. It's designed for a wide open space. So you need to make sure that if you do have those, your HVAC system can actually handle it. And if not, you're actually creating other issues with worse air by having those plexiglass partitions. So our general things we have here for rehearsal spaces is outdoors rehearsals is our #1 choice, using individual mitigation techniques as described. Indoors with elevated outdoor exchange rates from a HVAC system, or indoors with typical outdoor exchange rates from HVAC plus recirculated air through a MERV 13 filter or addition of appropriately sized air filters that are HEPA rated. And then indoor with outdoor exchange rate from open windows supplemented with appropriately sized HEPA air cleaners with airflow that's reduced under certain. So like if you open the windows and there's no wind, that's not going to be good. What we really want to avoid, and the only thing we're really looking to definitely avoid, is those closet scenarios where there's no windows, there's no good airflow, and you have no way of filtering the air. That's something we don't want people in. And you can check out more information on the standards for your schools at the ASHRAE resources. So big thing, again, masks, distancing, allowing airflow to go through, increase your ACH rates in your HVAC systems, and practice good hygiene. We should be done with the full study with the Colorado components in December and the Maryland components in January. That way we're able to have everything published, and I know the researchers are working on publication stuff at the moment. So I do want to go and address the CLARINET real quick. So I'm going to bring up this graph of APS data for CLARINET, because I've been asked this question quite a bit. And share screen. And people are like, well, but we should have the clarinets and saxophones and things in bags or something because all this aerosol is coming out of the keyholes. What we found is actually there's not as much coming out of the keyholes as one would think. And this is in the written report. So if you want to go check this out on your own, you're more than welcome to. We'll make sure everyone has access to the links. What we have here is this is the bell uncovered with the keyholes in a box. So we're collecting everything. We have the bell covers we have the bell covered with the bell and the keyhole in a box. You see we do have a reduction of aerosols here. We have a bell covered with just the bell in a box. So you see there's not much difference between the two. Then we have the bell covered with the bell and the keyholes back in the box. So we do see a little bit more. One thing we've noticed, this is after 80 minutes, right? So one thing we've noticed is that as the players warm up, they start producing more aerosols. We're not sure why. We think it's because the instrument's warmer and it's producing more condensation that's then being broken up. We still need more study on that one, but that's one trend we're seeing. And then just for funsies, we decided to take the bell cover off and see what happened, and we shot right back up to around the original area of aerosol production. When we look at it this way, we sampled it in 2 different directions now. So this is being sampled near the bell with the bell uncovered while I play, and then we're sampling near the bell or near the keys with the bell uncovered. So you see here how little aerosol there is coming out with the bell uncovered from the keys. Then we sampled near the keys with the bell covered. So you see we do come up a little bit, but it's still significantly smaller than where the bell's coming from. And then we sampled near the bell with the bell covered. So what we're seeing here is still on a percentage basis, a very little bit of aerosol coming out of those keyholes. And there's a lot of variables that go with the keyholes. So for example, when you're going to have your fingers covering them, you may have some of them closed, some of them not closed. So we just have a couple of those different variables that exist exist with the keyholes. But by and large, we're seeing well over 80% or more of all aerosols going out the bell of the instrument. And the reason for that is fluid dynamics, right? The aerosols are going to follow the path of least resistance, and the path of least resistance is to go down the barrel, out the bell. Okay, let's see here. So with that, I think I've completed our third round review. I know that was lightning fast, a lot of information. Hopefully you've been able to see the first two study results. We also posted an hour-long conversation with our researchers on the YouTube channel. And I see that Lori has posted the study page in the chat. So there's an hour-long YouTube video if you want to hear the researchers themselves talk through this. They do a great job of going through what everything means and how it impacts. But hopefully this was helpful on going through a whirlwind component of how the aerosols are looking. So I'll take any questions or comments anyone may have.
James, there were a few comments in the Q&A. I just want to make sure you feel like you've answered all 4 of them.
Sure.
You're able to see them there. Actually, there are 5 now.
Yep, I am. So the first one with bell covers for clarinet, does that mean just the bell? Yes, that means just the bell. We have never actually recommended one of those bags. It was actually, we used it in the very beginning to do a collecting how much aerosol is produced inside of there. But then once we found out how much aerosol is coming just from the bell, we kind of focused there. And then as you can see in those last APS charts that I showed, that we're really stopping most of them with just using the bell cover itself. Let's see. Bell covers when they impede the instrument from playing certain notes. Yeah, so I don't know what to do for that. You know, it's one of those things where we want non-impeding mitigation strategies. We don't necessarily have those. So again, I go back to that. We either do some mitigation to figure out how to continue to have music in our classrooms, or we just can't. And I think that the mitigations work pretty well. And we have some actual real life examples of that occurring, that they are pretty effective. And so I'm not sure what to do, to be honest with you, on when they impede from playing certain notes. I wish I had a better answer than that. And if anybody has a better answer, music teachers are wildly creative, and I'm sure someone has figured that out. So if you have, and you're on this call, please feel free to share with your fellow music folks. Okay, has there been any discussion about after 30 minutes and 1 minute air exchange, can the same group of students return to that room for more rehearsal? Yeah, so I'm assuming that that's 1 minimum and not 1 minute. So yeah, so if you have that 30 minutes out or 30-minute rehearsal, and then you have 1 complete air exchange rate occurring in your room, that same group can go ahead and go back to their rehearsal room. What you're trying to do is let the HVAC system and your filters clean the air a little bit. Otherwise, those aerosol clouds will build over time, and then your chances of infections go up exponentially once you get past 60 minutes. So that's why our 30-minute time period is there, because it's easier for your HVAC system to clean all that out. Okay, were there any studies done on the piccolo trumpet for comparison to the regular trumpet, or even the C trumpet? We have not. We've just tested the standard B flat trumpet. What is the best bang for your buck? Really good bell cover with MERV 13 or good playing mask? So I can't recommend any particular brands, because I can't, because as soon as I do that, they're all going to be endorsed, so I can't do that. It's also why I was really excited when there was a shortage of puppy pads back in July. That was an interesting thing. But you know what I did with my sons is I actually ordered MERV 13 material on Amazon. I think it was like $16 for 20 square feet of it. And then he wanted this farmyard pattern, so we just made our own. It didn't look the best, but it was effective. We have since found one that he can put on the saxophone and cinch it shut. That seems to work out pretty well. But if you Google MERV 13 instrument bell covers, you'll find some companies that sell them. And then honestly, for singers, if this bad boy can fit, right, we're talking just this thing, you know, $3 for 25 masks. But you got to make sure they fit well, especially along the backs here. So whether that's twisting the ear loop or, you know, using some sort of skin-friendly medical tape or something like that, that helps. But we have not tested the singers masks or anything like that, just because we want to make sure that the mitigations we're using are easily accessible and affordable for schools. Okay. Let's see, Lori, you okay if I just kind of read these out loud and go down the list?
I would be happy to. For my administrators or non-musicians, any reason why percussion students, drumline, and ensemble should be prevented from rehearsing and playing?
No, they should all be masked with properly fitting masks, and socially distanced, and still the 30-minute reductions, right? Rehearsal time, just because they do produce those aerosols, depending on how many people are in that room. There's a lot of factors that go into there, but there shouldn't be any prevention from playing. That goes for string players as well, right? If they're masked and socially distanced, it should just be the same as being in any other classroom for them, because they're not producing any additional aerosols beyond being a human being alive in a room.
The next one is, are there any recommendations on how to make multi-layer bell covers with MERV filters or where to purchase them?
Yep, I kind of covered that with
Yep.
the last question. Yeah, like I said, it was my son and I had fun doing a craft project. You know, he wanted a farm scene for his first one, and then the MERV 13 material. It took me 3 tries because I'm slightly disabled using scissors because I'd never quite grasped that in kindergarten. So my entire family makes fun of me for my scissor ability, but I was bound and determined to do it. And so we had fun kind of making that craft project. So you can do that. But there are places that do sell pretty easy to use and pretty nice looking bell covers. And they're actually probably better for the performance. I know there's that issue that a couple people may have had. They're probably better for performance with the professionally made ones, but they're doable, especially if you have a parent booster group that has sewers in there. They could probably knock out a whole bunch of them pretty quick.
I'm going to combine 2 here, James. So this one just says, for example, for the clarinet, the B and C, and the staffs don't speak. Over in the chat, one person said, I had a student put a pencil between his clarinet and his bell cover. It allowed low E on the clarinet. Comments on that?
Interesting. I just make sure that there's no air coming out where the pencil is, right? That'd be the thing you'd want to just double check.
I'm going to skip over to one question in the chat. Are there plans to model aerosol concentration buildup in a space with ensembles of various sizes?
Yes, that is what we're trying to work on now. So what you saw in the CFD modeling with the 7 singers, 7 clarinets, that is what we're building up to multiple different kinds of instruments and multiple different sizes. One thing that I didn't realize when we first started doing this, I thought those CFD models could just be, kind of poof magically created. They take an enormous amount of computer power. And so those 2 models that I showed you took a month for a computer to generate, because they follow like every particle that moves around in that room. That's why they're so accurate. But they take a lot of computing power to do. So we're waiting for the computer power to open up throughout our labs, basically.
My flutes wear masks, and all my instruments have bell covers. How important are the face masks for the other instrumentalists?
Yeah, so one thing that I found really interesting, and this was done repeatedly by our person who plays clarinet in the lab, is as you play longer, especially with our less developed players, your embouchure gets tired. And as that occurs while you play, and also as the instrument warms up, it produces more aerosol at the mouthpiece. So what those face masks with the slits do is it actually prevents those large droplets from being dispersed across your room. So they are very beneficial, even though we're stopping a bulk of the aerosols at the bell. It is that extra layer of protection of the mask on that allows those things to really provide more safety. And I think too, it's important to realize that masking in general is just good practice. So with that slit and the other mask kind of hanging off the ear, you're able to make sure that you're kind of keeping people as safe as possible. And also that with the slit, it's stopping anything. So if you do have a embouchure that just gets tired and starts spewing out extra stuff, remember, we can't see any of this. So the mask does stop a lot of that.
James, I'm going to take us to the golden question. It's come in many forms, and I'm going to read something from the chat first, and then we'll go into the question in the Q&A. It says, maybe this is coming later. Wisconsin has a mask mandate. Okay. It's been said that due to the mask mandate, students cannot wear masks with slits, and therefore cannot play indoors. Any thoughts or guidance on this? It's coming in, this question, in multiple ways, but just starting us addressing the situation in Wisconsin.
Sure.
The Supreme Court in Wisconsin, also, just so you know, today is taking up the mask mandate as a whole and whether it's legal or not. So in Wisconsin, we've got this real complex situation. So what are your thoughts?
Sure. So I can't talk on the political spectrum that's occurring in Wisconsin, because that would be probably not kosher for me to do so. However, one thing I will say with the mask, the slit mask, is it's important for people to understand that is for musical performance time only, right? So what's happening when you have the slitted mask on and the bell cover on, you're more likely completing that mask. With the slitted mask becomes an issue is if you allow the students to wear the slitted mask in the band room, and then they play, they put it down, they talk, they move around, they do the thing. Now that slitted mask is probably not doing much, right? Because it's only designed for when you're playing. So if you were to have the slitted mask, you're playing with the slitted mask, you stop playing, you put your other mask on, you're basically reducing the aerosols that would have been reduced had you not had the slitted, had you just had a regular mask on, because you're kind of completing the system, right? So you have a mask, it's got a slit, you have your instrument blocking a big chunk of that slit in there. So make sure the slit is properly sized for the mouthpiece you're putting in. And then the bell cover is the other part of the mask. It just happens to be, this far away instead of right there. So there is some physics that go with that. But again, the big ticket is when you're not playing, that other mask is draped over the slitted mask.
And I want to be clear to those listening, WSMA is not going to take a stand on this or recommend or not recommend. What we're attempting to do tonight is to share with you the research and the science that's out there. Just like all of you, we will continue to ask questions about that language. And every local school district needs to make its own decision by working with its county health department and by working with local and tribal authorities to make the best decision. So am I aware in Wisconsin right now that certain counties have sent out from public health that you cannot play indoors? Yes, that is happening. Is it happening in every county? No. And I think that's where, again, as a statewide organization, what we're doing tonight is sharing information with you so you can make good decisions, but also ask good questions. And so this leads into this next question. So why is Wisconsin DPI not recommending playing wind instruments, specifically citing a lack of research, when Dr. Weaver and NFHS are clearly doing the major research necessary? I think that's the question that Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, will need to answer. Julie Pakowski was potentially going to attend tonight, and I don't have the full list of attendees open in front of me. Julie, we're going to go on to another question. If you are here and you'd like to respond or type something in the chat to answer that question, so why is that the current stance? DPI would be the correct organization to answer that question. But do you have any comments on the question, James, before we move on?
Yeah, I think with all the recommendations that we've been coming out with both the study and the NFHS in general, and other national organizations that have been having guidance for state associations to work through, they all state that the best thing to do is make sure that you're in compliance with your state and local health departments, making sure you're kind of working hand in hand there. So I know, I live in Indiana right now, we're on a county by county restrictions and how they occur. So depending on how Wisconsin operates, which I'm not 100% sure, those local and state health department officials are the ones that would be able to kind of mitigate, or not mitigate, but recommend some of the risk mitigation factors that you'd want to look at within your municipality or county or region of counties or state.
Thank you for that. So now we're back to puppy pads. What about, we just transitioned back from the heavy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What about water keys? Do we need to catch the water or empty on puppy pads? Talk a little bit about that.
Right. So this is something that's kind of gross. There's a reason I'm a string player. That was a joke, by the way. So all brass people don't hate me right now. But one of the things we want to do is we want to make sure we're not having unmitigated discharge of fluids that could potentially carry the virus. because this virus has a lot of asymptomatic spread, you could have a student in there who doesn't even know they're infected, and infecting other people. And when you have the condensation with the water key that's blown out, that's an unmitigated blowout of there. And it's going to come in the parts of like dropped water that we can see, and also water particles we can't see that can carry the virus. So we want to make sure that we recommended the puppy pad or some sort of absorbent material, because you can lean down close to it, discharge the water key, and then it'll collect everything and absorb it there, and then you can throw it away. There's a lot of other products out there you can do. I saw some people doing stuff with like, remaining little Tupperware containers on there, all sort of like Ziploc bags. Like, people are creative, so do whatever you can. Doesn't matter to me. We just did the puppy pad recommendation because it was easy and disposable. And at the time, they were really widely available. I think they're widely available again today. That was one of the reasons why we recommended that, because we wanted something that was absorbable, disposable, and pretty readily accessible and inexpensive to get.
All right. This is a question coming in through the Q&A. There's a couple of people asking in the chat. So there's a Q&A feature that a lot of people have asked questions in. So if you're looking at the chat, you wouldn't necessarily see some of these that I'm reading. So what is the best way of estimating or determining air exchange rates?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what you want to do is talk to your facilities management. So depending on the size of your school district, you may or may not have people who know this off the top of their head. If you have a district that's kind of in an energy contract with like a, say, Johnson Controls type company, they may be able to tell you exactly what the air change rates are in all the rooms, because that's part of their energy savings strategies, right? But otherwise, start with your custodial staff, your facilities management staff in your school district, and they should be able to find that out for you. If you have newer HVAC systems, those are easier to find out because those records are readily available. If you're in an older building with an older HVAC system, that might be a little bit harder to come by, but working between your administration and your facilities management folks, they should be able to figure that out for you. Or at least get you pretty close estimates.
All right. This next one says, our administration is changing our schedule, and that would mean 25 minutes for 6th grade band, 25 for 7-8 band, and then 25 minutes for high school band. No air exchange, but with about an hour and a half of kids, hour and a half between the kids playing or singing. Choir be the same. Thoughts on that?
So I'm assuming it's 25 minutes class period change time, 25 minutes class period change time. So we're talking like 5 minutes between each one. Yeah. I'm going to guess that's what she means there. Yeah. So, I mean, really the thing is, if you can increase the amount of air change rates in there, that would be good. And I'm concerned when they say no air change, does that mean there's no fresh air coming in at all? So what you can do there is you can bolster the room with HEPA air cleaners that can help exchange those air rates, right? So for example, my wife is a middle school math teacher, and because I'm paranoid on this stuff now with this research study, I went and bought 2 HEPA filters for her room, because that's how many her room needed for the size of her classroom. And we cranked up the air exchange rates from 3 to 11. And you can walk in that classroom and the air just smells cleaner. I don't know how that works, but so there are those options, and those are pretty effective options.
Great, thank you for that. This next one says, these results seem promising and seem to contradict the recent recommendations of WSMA and DHS. Thoughts? I'm going to assume this person means DPI and DHS, because as a reminder, WSMA right now is putting out information for you, so you have good information related to these research studies. We aren't making recommendations. Recommendations come from DHS and DPI, but assuming this seems to be along the lines, James, of that other question. So I think I'm going to move on, and I think we've addressed that, but if there's additional specific questions about that, let us know.
Local and state health departments are really important in those decisions.
Yeah. Are there details in the report? And then the person says, I promise I'll read in detail. I love that. About minimum cubic volume size for a rehearsal room and the number of students in the room beyond 6-inch distancing. And I know Yeah, how many kids can we have in a classroom? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we intentionally did not say, here's how many that you should have, and for a couple of reasons. One, some state and local health departments will say, no more than 10 people inside of a room, or no more than 25 people inside of a room. So you need to go with those recommendations first, right? Whatever your local health department is saying. The other thing we wanted to do was we didn't want to put a number in there because everybody's room size is different. So we've said, hey, no more than 15 people. I'm making this number up. No more than 15 people in a room. But if your room is the size of a large closet, well, you shouldn't have 15 people in there to begin with. So what we did is we're like, well, we want to have a 6 by 6 foot distancing. So 6 feet in front, 6 feet side to side. And then what you can fit in that room that also conforms to your local health department's recommendations, that's how many people should be in that room, right? So if, for example, your room is big enough where at 6 foot by 6 foot, you can fit 18 students in that room, then that's how many students should fit in that room. And then, if your local health department says no more than 15, then that answer then is cutting out 3 more kids and having 15 people in that room with the proper social distancing. As far as the cubic volume goes, cubic volume is actually more important for air exchange rates than it is for the amount of people within a room. So we want to make sure the room capacity, like I said, sticks with social distancing norms. And then the cubic volume will actually have a bigger impact on how many air exchange rates you have. So, for example, like if you're practicing in a gigantic 10,000 seat arena that has 5 million cubic square feet of volume space in there, you obviously don't need to have 11 air change rates an hour because one, you'd be blown off the floor because that's a lot of air. But two, I mean, if you have that much space and that much air, you're more simulating an outdoor environment than you are necessarily an indoor environment. So, something to think about there. So it really has that the conversation with your facilities management to see how many air change rates you go, and then your local health department on what the standard would be for how many kids could be in a room at a time. That's probably more beneficial than having the cubic volume size as a standardization. We do have on the research page, I think it's on the written report at the bottom for, let me just double check. I have the written report in front of me. Yep, on the last page of the written report that you'll find on our website, we do have this thing called risk assessment tools. And there's a University of Colorado Boulder risk assessment tool you can click on. And with that risk assessment tool, you can actually go in and put your size of room by cubic volume, so ceiling height, square footage, and it'll give you and put up in a whole bunch of other factors, and it'll give you your risk level for infection within that area. And what I'll do is I will grab that link and I'll toss it in the chat window real quick.
Perfect. I'm going to skip over to the chat, but the chat that came into the panelists. First of all, I just want to thank Julie Palkowski, who is the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, Arts and Creativity education consultant. She is here tonight, and she did just type us 2 answers. Julie, wanted to make you aware you sent it only to panelists and not panelists and attendees. If you intended to send it to both, let me know. I can certainly paste it again if you'd like, but she basically says, hello everyone, my response for Wisconsin DPI's current stance is within her letter to the field. And then I can paste that in the chat. What she shares is that she took the phase 3 report on Friday and did share it with the people at DPI for their review. So it sounds like the information that has come out, Julie has shared. And then she shares links to 3 more resources. Again, it was sent to panelists. Julie, let me know. I will, here, she says give to all. So I'm gonna just go ahead and paste these 2 to everyone. The first one from Julie, and then the second one from Julie here. This will give you the resources for Department of Public Instruction. And again, part of what I think tonight is about too is there is research, not yet published, but getting close, right? And how might there potentially be another review of this information may be helpful. So we'll see if that happens. All right, back over to our Q&A. How often do we need to clean the bell covers? Can MERV 13 be washed?
Yeah, so when you get your MERV 13 material, check the manufacturer's recommendations on laundering. Most of them can be washed by hand. but you want to check for that. The other thing you can do to sanitize the bell covers, and you can do to sanitize masks, which is put them in an oven for 10 minutes at 150 degrees. It seems weird, but that actually is a thing. And we recommend washing those bell covers at least once a week.
Great. The next one isn't, we've answered the mask mandate question, so I'm going to go ahead and go past that one. Has the study discussed the size of a room per person ratio? For example, if you're rehearsing a group spread out in the house of an auditorium.
Yeah, I think that one's really similar to the cubic volume one. So
Okay, perfect. Has NFHS or anyone on this research team collaborated or shared their findings with any health departments? DHS has made comments that these mitigation measures are not sufficient and not in compliance with our state mask mandate. I'll answer that to just say, I think that's part of what you're seeing from Julie over here, is that Julie has taken this information back for another review to the people who communicate between DPI and DHS. Julie, let me know if that's not an accurate summary, but that's my understanding, is that she has moved that back up for their review. I think the next one is really similar again. Yes.
Yep. Well, and the different size rooms is something that, sorry,
Yep.
this is one of the different size rooms. So we're slowly working through that. Some of the stuff we've really been focusing on, and one thing I need to say is that even though 6 months for all of us seems like an excruciating long time for the study, the researchers like the fact that we're doing this in less than 18 months is lightning fast for this kind of research. That's why we have 14 members on the research teams working all the time to do this, to try to knock that time scale down. We're having a couple issues with different size rooms because of access to off-campus facilities. And so right now, the best thing we can do is some modeling, but we're still working on those areas too for figuring out how much we need to do within those other rooms. So once we figure all of that out, I think we'll be coming out with some more as the publications and studies come about, but it's just a matter of time. And so even though we're working as quickly as we can, I totally understand that it's not fast enough for some instances, but we'll continue to explore those areas.
So basic question, fabric face masks sold in department stores or the kind grandma makes, how safe? Fabric versus those disposable? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we haven't actually tested the fabric masks for this particular study because we wanted to find out what was super effective and then can we replicate that over and over and over and over again. So once we found our really effective mitigation strategies, which are easily accessible and affordable for schools, we just stuck with those and didn't go out into the other areas. Now, the CDC has found that those department store masks are effective when you are socially distanced and not talking, so just existing in a space. So I would assume that's the same way for here. But remember, when we're singing and playing, we're doing much more than just existing in a space, right? So I think that the recommendation of having that surgical style mask material for singing especially is important. I'm not sure about the fabrics because we haven't tested that yet. There is another study out of a different Colorado university, CSU. John Fulkins is testing a whole bunch of masks, like 100 different kinds of masks. And so as that study comes in, I think we'll find out more of that answer. But I'm not sure exactly where they are in their particular study.
Did you look at tone quality, and like this question asked MERV 13 multi-layer bell covers, do they affect the tone quality of instruments?
I'm sure they do. We did not specifically test for tone quality because we're looking for safety or lowering the risk of COVID-19 infection inside of a classroom by aerosol transmission, right? So we did not necessarily look at tone quality as what can we do to balance that out between risk and tone. I tell you, my seventh grade saxophone player that I have as my son in my house, we threw his bell cover on. I'm like, hey, Cooper, do you feel a difference? I'm like, not really. But I think the more advanced player you are, the more likely you are to feel those tone quality differences and the response differences, right? Because you're more in tune to your instrument and what it should feel like and sound like and those kinds of things. So I think our more advanced players definitely will feel something different, where our less advanced players probably won't as much.
This just says, what about the masks that have a slit, but there's a second layer above it? And
Yeah, is that one of those like overlapping jobbers?
yeah,
Yeah, so I think those are fine. I think the thing you want to remember too is the same thing with just the slitted mask is that it's a performance only mask, right? It's not designed to be a mask independently. So again, I would take those as performance masks, and when you're not performing, you should have either another mask over it or replace the mask with a normal mask.
how does the spread of aerosols associated with playing and singing with the research-based mitigation compare to that of an average classroom?
Yeah, so I can't actually answer that question because there has not been a study that has studied the average classroom. So this by far, we have more information on how to prevent stuff in performing arts than we do in any other aspect of the school.
Isn't the tricky bit in the wording that it's published research that seems superfluous by now? So
I have my own personal feelings on
yeah.
that, but I'm not sure I can dive into that at the moment.
Yeah, I think for the purpose of tonight, we'll just say we understand why you're asking the question.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We have a design for a modified band mask that has an overlapping flap like men's underwear. The mask closes when the mouthpiece is removed. Does that sort of mask pass your standard? You answered that in that previous question. In other words, would you still recommend that students have an additional mask? And you've answered that as well. So I think we're good.
Yeah, and I think too I mean, one thing that it depends on how far that flap is going over, right? And so it's one of those best judgment things. One of the things you may want to do is just kind of see. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm conflicted a little bit on that, right? I can definitely go back and ask our research team on their opinion on that, because if it really does like cover and it's sealed, then you're really not having as much of an issue. But if it's not covered, then you're definitely going to want to have another mask, right?
There's a request before I go on to the next question in the Q&A. In your presentation, there was a type of surgical mask and a number. Are you able to share that information in the chat?
Yes, it is in the written report. So let me grab that real quick and I'll toss it in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, because at first we were saying an ASTM level 3 standard surgical mask, and then we ended up having an issue that those are really difficult to get. And so we changed it to the ones that are easy to get and retested and found that they are just as effective. So, so it's good. So I'll place that in the chat now. And it is a 3-layer surgical style mask using a standard such as GB T32310.
Great.
Just rolls right off the tongue.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think the next one's just for me to confirm. It says, because we're following county health info and district choices, it's safe to understand the virtual solo ensemble festival is on as planned. Yes. So right now, WSMA, all of our programming is virtual, and we don't have any plans to change that. Playing solos versus playing ensembles in a school might be impacted depending on how your school is interpreting this at the school. But, we have a lot of kids who are also preparing and working out of their homes. So we as an organization don't have any plans to change any of our virtual programming. Next question. If you're in a large facility, say a performing arts center seating 800 with a group of say 50, do you still need to follow the 30-minute rule?
Yes, 30-minute rule also exists for outdoor rehearsal and performance.
So just anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
And it's because what happened, and I can explain that a little bit more because people are like, wow, that doesn't make any sense. But think of the aerosol you produce, and let's pretend that you're a asymptomatic infected person. Think of it like Pigpen from the Peanuts, right? So you have this cloud that just builds around you the whole time. And that's your aerosol that's accumulating around you. And so what you need to be able to do is so you prevent people from walking through it and other types of things, is allow for the air to settle. Now, an outdoor area, we just say, everyone just sit down, grab your water, don't talk, don't move, just let the air kind of clean out around you. When you start getting to super large venues, it's more like that, where you just kind of need to let the air handlers do their thing. However, you are still indoors, so you probably need to clear that out just to allow the air handlers to filter through the air. That's really the big thing you need to do. But yeah, the 30 minutes is indoor, outdoor, and size of room doesn't matter.
Is it okay if brass players simply empty their water keys in a classroom garbage can that has a garbage bag?
Yeah, so the issue you're going to have with that is if you have a line of brass players lining up to empty their water keys in the garbage, you're now forming a line of things that are going to spray up out of the garbage. So it's better to have an individual absorbency component.
So you mentioned recorder tested like the flute, but it wasn't on the chart. Do you have data on a chart somewhere where the aerosol is emitted through the window of the recorder?
Yeah, so if you go to I can actually show you real quick, but it's on the written report for the here, I'll show you quick. But it's on the written report. If you go to the website and you find the third aerosol written report, you'll see this guy right here. And here's our recorder APS data. And here is our 0.15. So you see here we have a sample near the bell, sample near the bell, sample near the fipple, and the background. So really we're just about background with near unmitigated play.
All right. The next question, I wonder about small practice rooms. If one student is in a practice room that's connected to a larger classroom, that student leaves, is there any concern about air exchanging or air moving to the large room? Any info is great.
Yeah, so one thing we recommend for the individual practice rooms is HEPA filters. You can toss in, you can just do those small ones that are designed for those smaller rooms. Try to keep that air clean. But once you open the door, you're exposing the air that's going to transfer between the two. I mean, there's general principles that I'm not qualified to describe because I'm not an environmental engineer. But you know, once the smaller room opens into the bigger room, it's going to get diluted fairly quick, depending on how many people are in that bigger room. I would really recommend just having one of those small room HEPA filters in your practice rooms, and that would clean the air and keep the air pretty clean to avoid some of those issues.
Okay. Next question's for me. It's about, we conducted a survey in September where we asked you about whether you were virtual, in person, or hybrid. And the question is about whether we compiled and released the data. What we learned really pretty quickly is the data became invalid because there were so many changes statewide in how everyone was operating. And now another 2 months has gone by. But here's what I would say. If you're still interested in that type of information, and now that things have settled down a little bit, we would be willing as WSMA to resend those questions out, but it would mean people taking it one more time. Just when we asked those questions was back actually near the end of August, early September, and there were a lot of changes that happened from the time people filled it out. We'd be happy to re-ask those questions so we can get a real good snapshot of what's going on. I'd be nervous about releasing that now that it doesn't really reflect what's currently happening statewide. But I appreciate the question. So thank you. Just, yeah, contact me and let me know, and we could look at re-asking those questions. Would the 30-minute time limit recommendation hold for classes in general, not just choir band aerosol producing classes, like any class?
Yeah, I would say any class where there's any sort of speaking going on, any sort of aerosol related or aerosol generating activity, 30 minutes would be the time period. And then probably, I mean, then we also have to think about the air change rates in there too, right? Like there's a lot of things that go into the air change rate component.
Great. All right. This person asked, could you please clarify the parts on the graph that list reading? Is that someone reading with or without a mask? Thanks.
Right. So they're reading without a mask at a low conversational level. So kind of think about how you would, you know, read to yourself while reading, right? That's what these people were doing because they weren't reading to somebody. They were just asked to read this sheet.
Why do trombones take more space in the room?
So this is an interesting thing. We actually were able to measure some aerosol being released from the slide. And then also with, especially if they have an ill fit pad on the water key on the slide. So it's just an abundance of caution.
Great, thanks. Regardless of the research, when DHS and DPI recommend against indoor winds and the state mask mandate, do you think in-person playing opens up directors and districts to liability? I would say is that's a decision you need to make at a district level. That I'm not able, and James isn't able to respond to that. I think that is a question you can ask at your district level where you're making the decision. One of the things, and James, I actually want to throw a question in here right now. I've got a question before we go to these because I've been really fortunate. One of the bittersweet parts of this pandemic is I've been able to meet with James and all of my counterparts nationally since March. We meet we were meeting every 10 days, and now we're meeting monthly. But I hear about other states. What's interesting about Wisconsin, unlike let's say Texas, is that in Texas, their music associations are actually more connected and part of, say, being actually part of DPI, right? Whereas here in Wisconsin, we have local control for decision making for school districts. So in some states, they make statewide decisions, and then it's a statewide decision for everyone. In Wisconsin, the locus of control lies with the school administrator and school board in every single school district in Wisconsin. So a question like this about decisions about risk and liability, that actually lies in Wisconsin at that local level. That's why we continue to say, and so does Julie, you really need to talk to your administrators and your local, state, local and tribal health departments. And because your county and local personnel are making decisions for your area of the state. So even the state recommendations right now, your county needs to interpret them. So what I would say is ask that same question to the local authority for them to give your answer. I think the other reason I have James here, though, and I'll be really clear, is this isn't going to last forever, but we're going to go through a period where we have to transition back. This is the research right now. We want to make sure you have it. So as you're making decisions, and some of you also do things outside of school, maybe involving church choirs or other youth ensembles, this is really important information to have. But what I don't think you should do is take what you learned tonight and just go back and not have these really important conversations. Make those decisions at your local level. The next one, if I have 10 air exchanges in my class, HEPA filter and an ionization system installed in my room, would it be better to teach 2 groups in the same room for 20 minutes with 5 minutes between? I feel like I'm in math class. This is great.
This is good.
Or to teach 1 group in that room and the other in a hall with no air exchanges, groups are 10 kids each. I'm gonna read that one more time for people listening who can't see the question. If I have 10 air exchanges in my class, HEPA filter and an ionization system installed, is it better to teach 2 groups in the same room for 20 minutes each with 5 minutes between, or teach 1 group in the room and the other in the hall with no air exchanges? Groups are 10 kids each.
Yeah, so this is kind of like the one, like how many purple pancakes we make.
Yeah.
At the end. Yeah. So no, this is a great question, Lana. So if you are able to fit your 20 kids in with social distancing, right? Social distancing in, everyone's masked. Your air change rates are about once every 5. If my math is right, once every 5.5 minutes or so. Then you're probably better off in that well ventilated space, right? And so yeah, and your minimum 1 air change rate in there is 5 minutes. So you're good to go on that. So really the big thing would come into, do you have enough space in that room to have 20 students in there that are socially distanced while masked with this kind of air exchange and air filtration? Those are really the questions you'd have to determine on your own on that one. But I would say definitely with that kind of air exchange rate and the HEPA filtration you have going on in there, you'd be better off than having kids in a hall with no airflow.
All right. The person just asks for one more clarification on the masks. Mm-hmm. If they were paper surgical style masks with slits cut in them. So when you talk about slit masks, yep.
Yep. So they were this kind of mask, that one with the standard of the GBT 32610 standard. This is the kind of mask we use for the slit. And I think in the second round of results, we have a photo in that PowerPoint on there, that PDF PowerPoint that actually shows what that looks like and how they cut it in there.
All right. Do you have information on the risk in the hallway is basically the essence of the next question. Many schools are keeping students in one classroom and not allowing classes to travel to the music room.
Yeah, so that we don't have any data for.
Okay. Do we know what prompted DPI to update their stance on instrumental music 3 months into the school year? Julie, if you have a response for that, go ahead and type it in the panelists and attendees. I do not know the answer to that question. So my rehearsal is 45 minutes. We play for 30. Is it safe to stay in the area for the last 15 minutes?
So this is something that we struggle with a lot, right? And I used to be a school administrator. I get it. Like you can't have kids just randomly walking around. And so this is where you have to find a good conversation with your school administrator on the balance between the recommendations that we have and the practicalities of what do you need to do with student supervision and classroom rotations, right? So the recommendation is 30 minutes. Now, this is something where I think you could, say, well, if we're going to rehearse for 30 minutes and then kind of spread out and just sit for 15, like now we're going to do music theory, or we're going to read about composers, or we're going to do something that's non-performance based. Could you make that happen? That's up for you and your administrator to have that conversation on, right? Are you feeling comfortable with that balance and those kinds of things? So that's a hard question to answer because you have a lot of factors you're trying to balance in there. And it's interesting because one of the things that hasn't come up yet, but it will come up soon, is all of our schools are designed for external threat safety, right? So we're talking school shooter scenarios and those kinds of things. Our schools are designed to be extremely safe that way, which is the exact opposite of the kind of school design we need for pandemic safety, right? So there's a whole bunch of factors that you need to have a conversation with your administrator in order to find the best mix that's going to work for your school.
Kind of connected is just another math problem about being on a block schedule. Have been keeping the playing time to 30 minutes, but do we leave the room for 30 minutes for the air exchange?
Yes, I don't think you need to leave the room for leave the room for 30 minutes. Find out what the air exchange rate is. I know our original recommendation was, leave the room for 20 to 30 minutes, let the air change out. And then as we were really focusing on what the science was telling us, we're like, we don't really need a time because your air exchange could be once an hour, and then you would only exchange half that air out. Or your room rate could be like the person that we had earlier, where every 5 minutes that air rate is changing out, right? So we really just recommend you find out what that airflow is and then see if you can't disperse to another area and then do something different and then come back in after a minimum of 1 air change rate. That's the recommendation.
Great. And I just reposted the NFHS link again. There's a question about it, but I just put it back in the chat again. My junior high and high school band classes are in back-to-back periods. I'm not sure that an air exchange is possible in our 3-minute passing time. What do you do?
That's a great question. That's where I would have that conversation with that administrator, right?
Yep.
And say, all right, so I need an air exchange rate to occur in my classroom. It's going to take me 7 minutes, right? Whatever that exchange rate is. And see if there's a way that we can do something different, right? Like maybe you have a staging area where everyone's going to go to the cafeteria and be spread out, and you can start some sort of like pre-bell work instruction while you're finishing up that air exchange rate, and then have them come in and start doing their thing. I don't know. I mean, that's just a random, like putting my principal hat back on, right? Like that's my random thought of the day there, but that's a good conversation to have with your school administrators.
So if specialists travel between homerooms, what type of considerations or questions do you think they should be asking? So they're going into homerooms and traveling themselves.
Yep. So it's always hard to control your own environment, right? Or it's easier to control your own environment than it is to control others' environments. So definitely masking is wildly important, and make sure that if you're going to be traveling in, so if you're talking like music on a cart instruction is what you're basically talking about here. So make sure that if your students that you're going to be having in that homeroom are singing, that they are well masked and is spread out as much as possible. Keep that activity down to the 30-minute time frame. If you're going to have shared equipment such as rhythm sticks and other things, you want to make sure that those are individually assigned to students and that they are keeping those kind of wiped down, so they're not having some of those. Even the phone mic transmission is not the main thing we worry about anymore, because washing your hands really does a good job of that. But it's still an issue, right? We can't just ignore it. So yeah, so those are just a couple of tips that I would have if you're teaching music on a cart. It really is one of those things where, if you could, talk to those homeroom teachers and be like, hey, can we figure out a way to make sure there's a bunch of fresh air in here? Because when we're, if for your own safety as you walk into those rooms. And maybe they have it. So
I'm going to skip over to that. I've been wanting to ask you, I was going to ask you before, and then I kind of jumped back in, but during our NFHS meetings, James,
mhm,
we've been hearing a lot about the College Band Directors National Association survey
mhm.
about what's going on at the collegiate level where we do have playing going on. What can you share about what you're learning about how this mitigation, is working?
Yeah. So CBNA has been doing a great job of tracking all of those things. They have about 150-ish schools that they're keeping track of. And so far, we've been lucky. They've all been following the mitigations that we've been recommending. And there's been no spread in a band course, either inside or outside at the college level, which is really encouraging. And we actually had a pretty good test of this about 2 weeks ago. The clarinet example I showed in the CFD modeling, that model started a month ago. Well, 2 weeks ago, interesting enough, there was a college that had that almost exact scenario occur, except they had 2 infected clarinet people that walked into a room with 7 other clarinets. They had 9 clarinets in there, did a half-hour class. Found out after the thing that they tested positive. They weren't feeling well, but went anyway. College students sometimes, and then got tested the next day and found out they were both positive. So then they contact traced everyone who was in that class, and no one else got sick, which is amazing, or got infected, which is amazing. But that really shows that the masking the student, masking the instrument, social distancing, reduced rehearsal time, and increased airflow really does have an impact. And what was cool about this was we got the CFD model, and Mark, my co-chair, is like, "Wow, did you make that based on the scenario?" And Dr. Schurbrink was like, "I don't know what scenario you're talking about." And we're like, "This is crazy. We just proved a real life thing with the model. Is super cool." So yeah, so we've been pretty fortunate, and I'm glad that the college level is tracking those things at a pretty good clip. So far, knock on wood, we have not seen spread that has occurred to the mitigations we've used inside or outside with band rehearsals. It's exciting.
We've got just a couple more minutes. I'm going to try to get through the questions that are still here in the chat. A couple of them I can combine. Is the 30 minutes of playing only? What if not playing? So we're doing music theory coupled with clarifying whether it's 30-minute classes with 30 minutes in between. So just one more time on that, and then
Yeah, so 30-minute rehearsals, but minimum of 1 air change rate in between. So that's really the answer there.
And for both
Yeah.
scenarios. Yep.
Yep.
All right. What does background mean on the graphs?
Oh, sure. So it's the amount of background aerosol that naturally exists in the room from having a human being alive in that room. So when we're bringing the aerosols that are expelled from the instruments or singing down to near background levels, it's basically bringing them down to a human is surviving inside of this room levels.
Since the research shows sopranos expel more aerosol particles, should we use more than 6 feet when placing them in a room with masks on?
They need to be masked. If they're masked up, we've shown in the data that we can reduce it down to a reduced amount of risk in there, right? So you can spread them out more if you'd like, but we're sticking with the CDC recommendation of 6 feet apart. And then with the mask, we're showing that we can bring that aerosol that is expelled from that singer down quite a bit.
This next question I'm going to read as it's written with parentheses. Sorry for the dark question, ... parentheses. Do you foresee these mitigation efforts being short-term, pre-vaccine? Or do you feel like this will be our new normal going forward for choir and band? And then in parentheses, and I hate the phrase new normal, but looking into the future, what are your thoughts on that?
So not to be weird about COVID-19, but I'm kind of excited about this moving forward for a couple of reasons. One, I think once the vaccine is out there, the Moderna one and the Pfizer ones are like wildly effective. And so far, if the safety trials come out the way they're coming, we could be vaccinated here in a year from now, right? But it's going to take a long time. And we have a large country of 350 million people. I mean, a little less than that, but a lot of people. So it's going to take some time to get to that level. Probably mid-year next year or something. I'm not part of that health team, so I couldn't tell you for sure what they're planning. But those are exciting things, right? But what I think is important is that since the study we've done here has never been done before, our main goal was the short run. Like, how do we make sure that music programs aren't being cut all over the country? And I think we've been fairly successful with that, and I'm excited about it. However, I think one thing that we need to keep in mind is that every year there is a flu that runs through everything. Now, it's not nearly as contagious and it's not nearly as deadly as what this bad boy is with COVID-19. However, if you think back to musical season, right, all of a sudden the flu flies through your leads and flies through your pit. These mitigation strategies would be effective to prevent that. And so if you start seeing a little bit of a flu exposure occurring, you could engage these mitigation strategies and probably make it through your entire show run for musical season, right? Or whatever else you're doing. Like, these mitigations are useful beyond COVID-19. That I think they're essential during COVID-19, but they will be useful beyond this. I'm hoping that once we're vaccinated and we're able to, ensure that this spread isn't as deadly as what it has proven to be across the country, that we may be able to get back into our old normal. But I'm not sure if we will fully get back there for some time. That's not a bright answer, but I do think it's more than just COVID.
Well, on behalf of all of the participants tonight in our organization, Dr. Weaver, I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. As we close, I just want to remind those of you who are still with us, we still got about 100 people who stuck with us the whole hour and a half, which is fantastic. This will eventually be posted on our WSMA Communications YouTube channel. It usually takes about 24 hours for all that magic to happen, but look for that in the next day or so. If you still have questions for DPI about their current recommendations, please contact Dr. Julie Palkowski. I know she'd be more than happy to answer your question or at least let you know the status of your question. If you have questions specifically about what we shared tonight in WSMA's programming, please go ahead and contact me. But if you have specific questions about research, I know Dr. Weaver shared his information at the end of the slide earlier, and we just really, really want to thank you again for being here with us tonight.
Absolutely. No, it's a pleasure to be here, and anything we can do to help, let us know. Go to the website that I know Lori has shared. A lot of information on there. There's also an FAQ page on there. So if you have questions that we may not have gotten to, you can see if your question's already been answered there. We also have a submit a question function. I would recommend not emailing me because I'm really bad at emailing people back, especially after these. I'll get a couple hundred emails, and it's not that I don't love and adore everyone and try to answer your questions. It's just I only have so much capacity to reply to emails. So use the FAQ function, and we'll try to get those answers as soon as we can.
Absolutely. There was one last question just about, do marching band students need to stand still so they don't march into other kids' aerosols? If we can just quick answer that one.
Yeah, so this it's weird answer, but it depends on like how much wind there is and all those kinds of things. If you got a pretty okay breeze that's kind of moving air around pretty efficiently, that's going to become what they call well mixed air pretty quick, and you should be able to move around. But you need to move around at a 6 foot pacing, right? So the standard formation